But we begin tonight with the man nicknamed Teflon Don. And no, I am not talking about the mafia boss of the Gambino crime family, John Gotti. Of course, I am speaking about Donald Trump. But like Gotti, Trump has a history of not only skirting the law, but always finding the way to evade any serious accountability for his actions, despite being constantly under legal scrutiny. Trump used his wealth and fame to make his own rules. It was that fame, enhanced even more by the hit show The Apprentice, that not only put him in a position to have sexual relations with adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2006, while his third wife, Melania, was home looking after his fifth newborn child, but which also helped secure him the Republican nomination for president in 2016. It was those same special rules for the rich and famous that shortly after the party's 2016 convention also caused his nomination to nearly crash and burn.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even know. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the.
Following the release of the Access Hollywood tape, there were those in his own party trying to distance themselves from him, withdrawing endorsements and even calling for him to step down as the nominee. At the same time, Trump was also facing the reemergence of Stormy Daniels, who wanted to go public about their sexual encounter. And that is when he entered into the scheme to keep her quiet by paying her off and illegally hiding the payoff in his business records in order to save his campaign, which, of course, is a crime. Yet, as we all witnessed in real time, he not only survived those dueling crises, but was actually elected president. It was just another example of a life lived without facing accountability. But just like John Gotti, it appears Trump's luck has finally run out, in the form of 12 New York jurors who yesterday found him guilty on all 34 counts charged against him in his hush money election interference trial, making him the first former U.S. president to be convicted of a felony. Trump has vowed to appeal the verdict, but as of now, he will have to return to that Manhattan courtroom in just 6 weeks on July 11th to face Judge Juan Marchand again and receive his punishment for his crimes. Punishment that could see him sentenced to up to 4 years in prison. And just 4 days after his sentencing, Trump is once again scheduled to attend a Republican National Convention where he is expected to accept the party's nomination to be their presidential candidate. The question is, will Trump once again be able to weather the storm and continue his reign as the dawn of the once grand old party? Joining me now is Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation, Katie Phang, trial attorney and host of The Katie Phang Show, and Catherine Christian, MSNBC legal analyst and former Manhattan assistant district attorney. Thank you all for being here. I am excited to have this panel here because I want to talk about the actual ABCs of what Trump is going to go through. But before I do that, I have to ask the person who knows Trump the best out of all of us. I don't know him personally at all, but you know him. How do you think he's feeling today?
I think that he is very, very much in shock. And I think that he is very depressed. You must know Donald Trump always had this complex that his father thought he couldn't rise to being what a successful business person. He is now tonight a convicted felon, someone that is on the brink of financial disaster after Tish James was able to secure a civil case against him, and one who always played the race line. We just had a tape come out because a guy ran the course of his NDA where he couldn't talk about things, that came out and verified said he used the N-word during The Apprentice. In fact, I have Kwame Jackson, who he talked about on the show tomorrow night with the Central Park Five.
Oh, I bet he's, I mean, does it hit different that it's a black DA and it's a black woman that got him with Tish James? Because maybe he's using it a bit more, isn't it?
Black DA in Manhattan with Alvin Bragg. Black Tish James got him. Black prosecutor in Atlanta. Black woman judge in Washington. And if he appeals, he has 5 black women on the appellate court here in New York. So he's going from the Central Park 5 to the appellate court 5. So, I mean, this is going to be the story of his life.
Yeah, to say nothing of Juan Marchand, who is, he's got to go back, and he's disrespected that judge a lot.
Absolutely.
And that's the guy who's going to sentence him. So, well, this is why they don't want DEI, because they really would like this diversity to exist, because it changes things. It makes law a little bit more fair and a little more broad. But I want to talk about about this, because a lot of black and brown people have gone through the system and have been convicted of a crime, and then they walk through a process that Trump will now get to walk through as well. Talk about the process. He's now been convicted. He has a sentencing date of July 11. What happens between now and then, Catherine?
He has to speak to a probation officer, because the way they do it in New York State is...
Watch them be black, too. Watch it be a black woman.
I have to say...
her name gonna be Marquita.
Many of them in Manhattan are people of color. And he has to be interviewed, because that's part of the investigation that the probation department does for a pre-sentence report, which will be given to the court, the defense, and the prosecutor. It's confidential, so it will not be unless it's
We'll
leaked.
never know who they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will. So, and that will form some of the basis of how the judge will sentence him. In New York, the judges have a lot of discretion to use whatever factors they think are relevant to sentencing, mitigating and aggravating. I think there are really only two mitigating factors in Donald Trump's favor. He's 77 and he has no criminal convictions. That's it.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
Yes.
You beat me to it.
Yeah. But what you're going to hear the prosecutor say, and they're going to probably put in the sentencing memo, the civil fraud, not conviction, but it was a judgment. You're going to hear about the sexual abuse, judgment, the defamation, two of them, judgment, Trump University. You're going to hear all of those bad acts, along with 3 pending indictments. Yes, they're not convictions. He's still innocent, but you're going to hear about that. You're going to hear about the violations of the gag order, including the violations of the gag order in the civil fraud case. You're going to hear about the constant, talking about being a rigged case. Obviously, there's no remorse. And also, I would, if I were the prosecutor, talk about how those politicians, the Speaker of the House and the Senate, were there probably at the behest of the defendant on trial, outside of the courthouse when a pending case is going on. So those are all of the aggravating factors that you're going to hear the prosecutors are going to say why he should be sentenced to whatever they are. I don't know whether Alvin Bragg is going to ask for incarceration.
Sure.
But you're going to hear the judge repeat it again, whatever he sentenced Donald Trump to.
Well, what could he ask for? Because, a lot of people, and this is sort of the conversation out in the real world where people are talking about this, they're saying it's not, people can't see him being sentenced to 4 years in prison. No one can picture that, even though Michael Cohen did get 30 months in prison, but okay, for the same crime. What could he get? Are we talking about him out picking up trash by the side of the road, him getting home confinement? That's what happened to Marilyn Mosby, 12 months of home confinement for taking her own money out of her own savings. What could he get?
Probation, house arrest, which is home confinement, prison. I mean, it runs the gamut. And I think that's what we need to see happen. I kind of want to backpedal for just a second to what you were saying in the setup, Joy, because the dam is breaking, right? And what bothers me, and this is something that Catherine and I have dealt with as prosecutors, Donald Trump didn't have to go and sit in a jail cell waiting for his arraignment for any of these cases, unlike anybody else would, unlike any of the people that we prosecuted. And so far, he hasn't spent any time in a jail cell for multiple repeated violations of the gag order, which other people would have been incarcerated by now.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And so I'm very curious to see what Judge Juan Merchan does in this instance, because anybody with 34 felony convictions, even though they're concurrent sentencing on each of them, and he could get up to 4 years, I don't know if they would get as much of a consideration of the practical implications of the United States Secret Service, et cetera. I mean, the privilege, and this is what bothers me the most about this case specifically. We talked about this last night on the panel. I keep on calling the original sin that 2015 Trump Tower meeting. Catherine's heard me say this repeatedly. But for the hiding of what happened, could he have made it to the Oval? Because the privilege that he got from the Oval continues with him now. These conversations we have about the Secret Service not being able to put him in jail for violating the gag order. What do we do with the Secret Service? You park them outside of the jail cell. These are the things that I don't understand. And so I'm a little bit frustrated that he continues to get the benefit of that office that I think he stole to be able to get in.
Right. And the thing is that, he keeps trying to say that the justice system is rigged against him. I mean, Rev, you have funeralized people for whom the justice system's meting out of justice meant shooting them before they ever were arrested for anything. I think of Sean Bell, who was coming out of his own wedding party. The justice system for him said, you're dead, you hit the ground dead in front of your wedding ceremony. And so the idea that this justice system, that he's just like some, these black rappers that have 260 murder counts they're waiting for. Oh, no, gentlemen, if you get convicted, you're going to sit in jail You're not going to be treated like him. But yet he's trying to make himself the equivalent of people of color who have been subjected to this system.
And we keep going along with it. And I think we've got to see him as he is today, a felon. I mean, people keep talking about it's a week or two before the Republican convention when he gets sentenced. What about 10 days
It's 4
before?
days.
But what about 10 days before when he debates Biden?
That's right.
I ran for president. I did many debates. If I was debating him that night, if I was Joe Biden, the first thing I'd ask him, did your parole officer allow you to come down here tonight for the debate?
That's right.
I mean, that's how we have to start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think Katie's point is right. When he stole that election, because I will say stole, because had we known all of this, I don't know whether he would have beat Hillary Clinton.
That's right.
What it means to people watching us is we wouldn't have had those 3 justices that assured affirmative action was gone, that voting rights was heard, and that women's right to choose was gone. It was decisive for all of us that he went in 16 and he went in under false pretense.
Here's an idea for what Joe Biden could say. Here's what Donald Trump said about Hillary Clinton and whether she should be elected if he were to lock her up.
If Hillary Clinton were to be elected, it would create an unprecedented and protracted constitutional crisis. If she were to win this election, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial. Her current scandals and controversies will continue throughout her presidency and will make it virtually impossible for her to govern.